Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to do a brief overview here on the concept of profitability. And it's important because profitability in any industry sector, we heard a little bit about the GDP earlier, is what contributes to the wealth of our country and puts money in the pockets of our population and our consumers and allows them to have money to engage in a discretionary expenditure like veterinary medicine, because that is what we are. What I'd like to start with is talking about why is it important now. Let's think back 20 years. Some of you in this room were 2 years old then. Some of you are older than that. 20 years ago, veterinary medicine approximately hit an era of almost 2 decades of double-digit growth annually. And when you have double-digit growth annually, you don't have to worry about sustaining profitability. It just comes because clients are coming, demand equals supply, as Heather mentioned, and so on, and sustaining it is easy. But now, in the last 3 or 4 years, the need for business acumen has changed. It's become more important, and it's separated our practices as well. We have some disturbing metrics now that we are a growth profession, now that we have other channels, now that the BEAR study said 40% of our clients now go online first and try and self-diagnose before they come in and see us. Our market penetration, which is the number of households that bring their animal to the veterinarian per year, is going down, particularly with cats. That's a disturbing phenomena for certain. Clients have a lot of choices nowadays. In many cases, they're very generic when it comes to picking a veterinarian. So how do we differentiate ourselves? Because the end result we're trying to get to is profitability, but because we have, in large extent, shot ourselves in the foot. And I give dentists credit. Dentists brand their message consistently. Come to the dentist twice a year. Get your teeth cleaned twice a year. If I walk down the street here in Montreal and asked 5 clinics, what's your anti-parasitic protocol? I'd probably get 5 different answers. That blurs it for clients. That makes sustainable or ongoing profitability harder to get to. And psychologists will identify something as type 1 thinking, reactive thinking, short-term thinking, and we start to see this. Let's send a message to the public that we're really not worth all the training and background that we have by discounting. And I can tell you, I'm sure Heather would agree with me, it does not work. But when the goal is sustainable profitability and trying to define that, reactive behaviors, market crowding, mixed messaging, the public will withdraw and we don't get our clients coming in. Everybody in this room will be doing the same thing every day, and that you are managing your risk. When you work in a business, when you go through your career, when you own a business, there's really only 5 types of risk out there. But the top 2, unless you have a lot of power, we cannot control. But as business owners, you can control the bottom 3 types of risk. And the one that will be most important, and the one that profitability drives the most, is your career planning risk. Because every owner will want to exit. Every person will want to exit this profession with one word in mind: control. And the problem that we're having now in trying to sustain profitability and engaging in reactive thinking is we're worried about the one above that. We're worried what the person down the road is doing. We're worried about competitive risk. Whereas really, if you manage the top one well, business risk, the decisions you make in the business every day, then the other 2 will take care of themselves, and you'll be able to exit in control, because that is ultimately what we all strive for. There we go. So profit is an equation. There's no question. And everybody that's taken even basic economics know this is the equation, but I would rather have you think about it as a concept. Not an equation, but a concept. The equation of profit, which is money coming in, money going out, leaves money left over, and the higher that number is, the higher the owner's income is, the higher the value of the business will be as well. And in veterinary medicine, depending on what species you work on, we can have very good profit margins. Compared to other big box stores that I'm showing there, our profit margins actually are pretty good if you do it well, and you want that profit to be sustainable. So this is what I would call business value flow. And this is where profit kind of sits in the middle. So money comes in day to day. It comes in through what we call profit centers. So we actually have a concept called profit centers on the revenue side, But what influences the ultimate business performance is not just the equation, it's not just the money in, it's the infrastructure, it's the bottom of the pyramid that supports the rest to ultimately generate the optimum profit and sustain that particular profit. And when you sustain it, you have continued employment, you have optimum value, and you have a practice that is desirable in the market, because we are seeing a real tiering of practices nowadays for certain. So profit centers with benchmarks now, I could look at your financial statement and say, you're not doing enough revenue, enough activity in your anesthesia profit center. You may not have fees high enough. You may not have protocols there. But it really starts with getting optimum compliance and adherence. Those are two key words for sustainable profit through all of these particular profit centers here. And there's a number of them. There's about a dozen of them in practice. They all have benchmarks attached to them, but they are all equally important to have money flowing through them. And again, I'll go through these fairly quickly, right down to emerging areas like alternative care or holistic medicine, the largest and fastest, not the largest, but the fastest growing niche in our business. So these numbers aren't important, only to say that benchmarking through revenue centers is only the initial part of defining what profit is. Benchmarking expenses as well to leave a return for the owner, because that return, that profit, is your income, is part of the equation. So the equation, revenue minus expenses, is still important to sustaining profit, and it's been benchmarked so we can say, where should you be? But really what's kind of emerged to influence optimum performance and risk and profit is the concept of value drivers. These came out of Harvard a few years ago, and it looks at small business professional practices and says, if you want the optimum value, it's not just about the equation. You want to sustain your profit, you have to have other elements of your business in place. You've got to have proactive thinking. You've got to have management in the practice. You need to have stability in your location. You need to have X number of households per full-time equivalent vet. The benchmarks, the equations fit in there, but also you need to think smart about when you're making a major decision to spend money on your facility or equipment. You need to have good marketing. You need to have all the aspects of the employee life cycle under the HR portfolio managed well. And you need to be thinking about a pricing model above the ancient cost plus pricing, because we're starting to move away from that as well. They drive values, they drive optimum performance, and that is what sustains profit. So those benchmarks under those value drivers emerge under what we call KPIs, key performance indicators. When it comes to the structure of your practice and all of those value drivers, they creep in to your equation to affect how sustainable is your profit likely going to be. So it's a great thing for a practice to do looking forward to say, where are we then vulnerable? Even though my equation for profit looks good now, if I'm vulnerable somewhere, then find out where. Compare me to the key KPIs and tell me where I am vulnerable. The biggest single structural change, and it's happening all across North America, is in consolidation, because size allows you in many cases to do better at a lot of the value drivers, because you have something we call economies of scale. And the models for consolidation, depending on where you are different. Could be buy practices, move some of them into a large facility. You know, if you're from the city of Calgary, it kind of looks like this, where they own over 70% of the practices in the city of Calgary, but don't move them around. Or if you're in a smaller area where you can have a central hospital model. These are all structural changes, but they're part of what are enhancing the value drivers to optimize profit simply through structure. Each value driver, I just showed that one as an example, has similar KPIs attached to them. This one's visible because we all see it happening, and owners see it happening for certain right now. So the value equation, though, sustainable profit, all the things I showed up till now is from the practice point of view. But sustainable profit means you need to hit the value equation from the client's point of view. Because sustainable profit means every client needs to walk out and think, I got these 5 components of service. And if you give them, that will be the client that will stay. And from their standpoint, they got perceived value. So sustainable profit comes from both ends. It comes from the practice analytics and metrics. It comes from comparing the benchmarks. And it comes from client perception. It does not just come from an equation. So if you're a practice owner here or a manager and you're thinking, where on earth do I start in all this? I think the thing is to say, where are you now? Measure the critical KPIs. Look where your deficiencies, your strengths and weaknesses, the age-old SWOT analysis, opportunities and threats are, and stage an action plan. It's very rare to see a strategic plan in a practice, but in my opinion, in an era of volatility where we're not a growth profession, every practice should have one, because that is how you will get to optimum profitability. So thank you very much. I only went a few seconds over, and thank you for having me.